Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. Before I introduce our next episode of the Authority File, I want to remind our listeners that we have a brand new podcast out. It's called Patron Driven, and it's a narrative-style podcast that brings you crowdsourced library stories where the personal meets the professional. Our first story is a 5-part series that follows 4 librarians through the destruction of the Lone Star College Kingwood Library after Hurricane Harvey, and the 2 years it took to rebuild. Patron Driven is out now, wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, so in the next 4 episodes of this podcast, we're going to be talking about a new book published by the University of Toronto Press. It's called Minds Alive, Libraries and Archives Now, and it features an amazing collection of essays from a wide range of international scholars. The volume sets out to challenge, in a constructive way, the current ideas around the value of libraries, archives, and those who work in them. In a fundamental way, it acknowledges that the world and the citizenry that inhabits it are rapidly changing, and it goes on to examine how the profession needs to change alongside. My guest is Dr. Tony Samek. Tony is a professor and chair at the School of Library and Information Studies at the University of Alberta. Tony co-edited Minds Alive with Dr. Patricia Demers, who is a distinguished university professor in the Department of English and Film Studies at the University of Alberta. This series is brought to you by the University of Toronto Press. In this first episode, Tony talks about the new book and how it came together and the main questions it's trying to answer. All right, well, Tony, welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So to start, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at the University of Alberta?
Okay, well, I've been working at the U of A since 1994, and I'm currently a full professor and chair of the School of Library and Information Studies, which is homed within the Faculty of Education. I'm actually just coming on the end of my 5-year term as chair, and I'll be passing the torch on July 1st.
Oh, well, congratulations for that.
My areas that perhaps are of interest in terms of drawing me to this project. Typically, when I'm not chair, the kind of courses that I teach are our foundations course, Foundations in Library and Information Studies, a specialized course on intellectual freedom and social responsibility in librarianship, where, for example, we would look at issues as we've seen recently with the Megan Murphy talks at public libraries, such as in the State's New York Public Library and Seattle Public Library, and the controversies around that. And I have taught many times our collection management course, as well as a course that looks at equity, diversity, and inclusion within the profession. And that all kind of springs off my areas of interest in my scholarship, which are expressive freedom and human rights and information ethics. And in terms of service that I've done from my base in the school, I've chaired our former Canadian Library Association's Committee on Intellectual Freedom a couple of times. I've served on the Canadian Association of University Teachers Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee. That's sort of akin to the American Association of University Professors. And the successor to the Canadian Library Association, the Canadian Federation of Library Associations, have recently served on both their Intellectual Freedom Committee and their Indigenous Matters Committee. And most recently, this past year, I served on a special advisory group for the University of Alberta on expressive freedom, as our government compelled us to put forth an expressive freedom statement based off of the Chicago principles in the U.S., which had happened in Ontario before Alberta. So that's kind of where my background's coming from in terms of my base at the school. But the last 5 years, as I've said, has been mostly administrative work.
Okay, excellent. So your latest book, Minds Alive, Libraries and Archives Now, you edited that along with Patricia Demers. Did I pronounce her last name correctly?
Demers.
Okay, sorry. How did the two of you come together on that collection? You know, what was the opportunity there to collaborate on the book, and basically how did it come to be?
We have an institute on our campus, the Coolett Institute of Advanced Study. KIAS is the acronym. And around the time I was starting as chair, around 2015, Pat happened to be, she had stepped in to lead the Institute for a while. And the Institute had developed this series called Around the World, a virtual conference series. They were a little bit ahead of the game
Yep.
on the commitment to sustainability and the environment and moving away from traditional conferences, and wanted to bring institutes and researchers together, and live stream worldwide and then archive the event. And
When was
Pat,
this?
well, we joined forces in 2016 on
Okay.
an around the world conference on the theme of library archives and public life. Just before that, Pat had led a consultative group um, on the Canada's Royal Society. Looked at did a consultation across the country on library and archives, and the report that Pat led on that culminated in 2014, and that was funded by the provost office here at the U of A. So as she was coming off leading that expert panel on libraries and archives in Canada, moved into leading at the Cool Institute, she then approached me. I was a new chair at SLIS at the time, School of Library and Information Studies, just to see if we'd like to join forces and collaborate. So that's really where it started. Her invitation coming off that Royal Society of Canada panel, coinciding with her opportunity to pick a theme for a virtual conference. And we connected there, and then began to share ideas of potential people to invite, what kind of awareness of opportunities and challenges we had about digital connectivity and so forth. Pat, I knew of her. She was working as distinguished university professor here at the U of A in the Department of English and Film Studies, and a real esteemed intellectual and scholar. And it was a privilege to have an invitation to work with her. And then we just kind of clicked along the way, apart from our shared interest in libraries and archives, museums, and the cultural network. She had been a chair before me, and we kind of connected also as women in scholarship and leadership, and had a lot of fun along the way, discovering different perspectives. And of course, librarianship is a feminized profession, and she's done a lot of work in women in writing. So things just kind of coalesced from there, and it turned out to be a lot of fun together. And then we brought on Leah Brochu, who had been a Master of Library and Information Studies student in the program at the school, as our copy editor. And then eventually connected with the University of Toronto Press and worked very closely with Mark Thompson there. And it was just one of those very positive projects where everybody got along great. We riffed off each other, and things fell into place very authentically.
Excellent. That's fantastic. So I'm always curious, particularly with these edited volumes, how um, the the contributors and essays and writings are assembled, so I'm curious to hear from you how, what were your and Pat's guidelines for assembling these writings, and how did you, the two of you, decide what would make it into the book?
Well, we had originally from the virtual conference, we'd made an effort to really bring people broadly from different geographic, ideological, and experiential points of view. So, as much as we could, we recruited as many of the speakers from that virtual conference as we could.
Hmm.
And then we kind of brainstormed together where we needed to maybe round out a little bit. And the intention really was that we would be able to have exchange between the contributors. So those that had been speakers became authors. We rounded out with a few others. And we really wanted people then, once they had done the first drafts of their contributing chapters, we shared the full draft manuscript with everybody to encourage people to riff off one another's contributions. And it was surprising fun how people reached out to one another across cultures and generations. And that really was the essence of the project, that the there would be some kind of connection, to really have a sense of an engaged community, really.
Right.
And we got that communal discourse that we wanted. It was, you never know if you're going to get it, but we did get it.
How That's great. So what was that like, that phase of the project where, after everybody had or received the first draft of the complete book, what were some of the ways they reached out to each other, or what were some of the more exciting or surprising interactions that you witnessed?
Uh, it was a little slow at first. We did a little bit of nudging, and I think, people are, I think maybe a little bit shy at first, and
Right.
I want to be polite. And of course, everybody's busy too. And,
Yeah.
we were very demanding because we're asking you to speak at a conference, and then we're asking you to send a chapter, and
Right.
then we're asking you to read other people's chapters.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's
So
like the classic challenge for any editor is to be that polite prodder for get people going.
we just kept ramping it up. But well, it was fun to see, for example, Alice Crawford in Scotland and Mario Hebert in Sarajevo, a much younger scholar coming out of a different generation and a very, very different culture. Begin making those connections,
Hmm.
and it really, I think, encouraged some people within our book community to maybe go out and follow up on readings and references and lines of thinking that maybe were not, what was in their base. So I think we all learned a lot from each other, and it made the project a lot richer. And
Hmm.
you know, it would be nice to imagine one day doing a volume two and bringing in people even further from geographically and from other cultures. And we'll see what that looks like down the road.
Yep.
These things do take a long time to do, but it really, we learned a lot more from doing it that way. It certainly slowed it down though.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the benefits outweigh the downsides in that respect. Um, I collectively, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what questions or um, um, are the writings trying to answer. I'm wondering if there are any through lines, or if not, what might be some of the top level issues that are addressed by the contributors in general.
Sure. I can throw through a few of them at you. I'm probably going to miss some because it's very layered and rich, but
Right.
certainly, we had a series of continually expanding kind of concentric circles of interrogation and revision that we came back to, that we see reoccurring. So, of course, libraries and accessibility and openness in the public sphere, the lures of technology, and then, of course, the reality of the unevenness of that. As we know about information poverty, we know about digital divide, issues
Hmm.
with broadband, all of those things. Probing the obstacles, as you can see in some of the works contributed, the challenges of paywalls, the values of transliteracy, different movements, do it your own libraries, the Occupy Libraries movement, enlarging interconnected roles of libraries, archives, and museums. GLAM would be the acronym we use for that.
Okay.
In public life, and then access to or control over archival records, and these ideas of information systems and convergence or reconvergence of those systems. And then sitting underneath that, thinking about traditions in different cultures, um, emancipatory projects, and some criticisms of perhaps traditional moral attitudes within the fields, and informational attitudes from the individual level or the collective level as well.
Hmm.
Thinking about the ethos of moral values in the fields, and thinking about new power structures that are being looked at through the field, and information myths, such as neutrality. And then, of course, hidden contradictions or intentionalities in different information theories and practices. Mario's chapter, for example, is highly theoretical. There's some chapters that are really building on the work of the theoretical work within archives, and then we have Brendan looking also through the museum and lens. And so
Hmm.
just trying to see what it's like when those things bounce off each other in different information models.
Yep. Did you have going into this, as you sort of assembled your team of contributors? At that point, did you have an idea of how you wanted to structure the sections of the book, or did you kind of wait until the manuscripts were in?
we we really waited.
Yeah.
We had heard from some of the contributors originally when they contributed to the Around the World conference, but you never know. When somebody speaks, it may look different when you get the written piece down the line and they've had time to reflect on that virtual conference. And then we invited a few other folks. So the structure really fell into place once the written pieces came in. After we
Mhm.
shared the whole manuscript to encourage interactions, things solidified. And at that point, we did see a sort of authentic narrative arc that engaged and emerged from the values through. And it developed organically into what we arrived at, as you know, is the five sections of the book. So enduring values we began with, and then moving into public literacy and private oases, then transformations and resistance, which is really, I think, interesting pivot in the book, and then disciplinary and institutional partnerships. And this brings, again, we're looking at libraries, archives, and museums, and then curation and
Mhm.
commons. And as you know, we close with a piece that looks at challenges of information and access in Indigenous contexts. And certainly, we're closing with that Canadian context of truth and reconciliation with Indigenous communities in Canada.
You just heard from Tony Samek, who co-edited Minds Alive, Libraries and Archives Now, along with Dr. Patricia Demers. Tony is a professor and chair at the School of Library and Information Studies at the University of Alberta, and Patricia is a distinguished university professor in the Department of English and Film Studies at the University of Alberta. This series is brought to you by the University of Toronto Press. Join us next week when we continue our conversation and talk about how, as if there wasn't already enough going on as it is, the roles of libraries and librarians are often contested.
Some of the contestation, I think we can safely say, sits around technologies that can be great boons or cause severe limitations for different people and groups. The world of information can be enlarged or it can be shrunk depending on the availability, the scope, the distribution of services. Wanting to have some kind of standardization in information models can also cause some kind of flattening in cultures where we lose important things. Just as influential, of course, are geopolitical locations, funding climates in different sectors. Not all the sectors, in fact, not all the populations, as we know, enjoy equal influence and benefits. We have concerns about access, about sustainability, about preservation that affect and often determine the content, the media, and technology housed within these cultural institutions and memory institutions.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line. I'm at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media specialist, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Covert. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.